My old CRO used to say at every single board meeting, somebody got fired. They just didn't know it yet. Now, that may sound really dramatic, but he wasn't wrong. Typically after a board meeting, there was someone who didn't articulate their ideas well, didn't support them with data, and ended up putting their job in jeopardy. Today, we're going to cover exactly how to structure your board deck and give you a plan for success. All right, here's a couple sections we're going to go through in this video. First is going to be the components of your board deck. So functionally, what should you be adding in and how should you prepare that deck for the board meeting? Next, we'll cover pyramid principle, just structured way of communicating, making sure your ideas hit, resonate, and are completely supported. We'll talk about the difference between slides that are simply just data slides and slides that tell a story. And then we'll wrap up with what you should be asking your board and what you should not be asking your board. Every board meeting is an opportunity for you to ask for their help, and we want to make sure you get the right questions so you can get the most out of the relationship. So let's talk about a couple components of the board deck and what's really important to make sure you incorporate in the board deck and how you should present it in the meeting. First, the board deck should speak for itself. So if you were not there to present it, it should stand on its own, convey all the information that you need it to convey, and not have you as the narrator to talk through it. We'll talk more about this in a little bit. Next, keep all of your slides and ideas results-oriented and future-focused. We're talking about the past to see if we hit the plan that we set ahead of ourselves, and using that to understand why something worked or didn't work, take that information and use it to plan for the future. Make sure you have titles that tell a story that's really related to the board deck speaking for itself. Have callouts on data. We'll show you a few examples of what that looks like. Structure everything in pyramid principle structure. We'll go in detail of what that means. And then make sure you prepare very well in advance. There's a lot of data and it takes time to put together something meaningful to have an effective meeting, and preparation is going to be key. Okay, let's talk about the pyramid principle. This is going to be a really important communication style to make sure you have the most effective board meeting possible. You typically don't have a lot of time to present a lot of data and make a lot of decisions. Structuring your communication in pyramid principle will help you be extremely effective. Pyramid principle is really just starting with your main idea and then working through your supporting ideas and data to support that idea you started with in the first place. This makes it a lot easier for the listener to understand what you're talking about and tying every additional piece of information to that main idea that you presented at the beginning of the conversation. Let's take a look at what pyramid principle might look like in a board meeting topic. Rather than starting with the details at the bottom where you're talking about data and very specific points that are seemingly unrelated, such as here's our created pipeline, here's our bookings, here's our churn by churn reason. We're gonna start with the main point at the top. And the main point that we wanna drive in this meeting is we have confidence that we are going to hit our forecast. Now, I'm going to support that idea with three main sub-ideas. The first is our new sales reps are ramping as expected. So this must have been a big part of the plan. We were maybe hiring a lot of reps. We maybe weren't sure if they were going to ramp or not, but we want to convey that our new hire ramping is working as we intended it to. Then we will support that idea with a few very specific data slides related to the new rep ramp. The second point we want to drive that's related to us hitting our forecast is our weighted pipeline is adequate to hit the quota that we have set ahead of us. Then we're going to take a look at some specific data slides and data points. We're going to look at our weighted pipeline to quota chart, and we're going to look at our historical weighted pipeline to close ratios to support the idea that we have enough pipeline to hit our plan. Third, we're going to highlight that churn is significantly decreasing. So we may even have more confidence than we had in the past because our churn is performing better than we thought it would. Better in the sense that we're having less churn than we thought we would. Some supporting data slides that we might relate to that point include year-over-year churn waterfall and a renewal forecast chart. So starting with the main idea of we have confidence in our forecast. As we work our way down through the main points, the board members and the rest of the people in the meeting are now relating those points to the main topic of we have confidence in our forecast. We are then supporting those main ideas with supporting data and detailed slides that completely relate to the argument that we started out with in the first place. Okay, let's go through the sequence of slides that you might put your deck into, and then we're going to cover a couple examples later in the video. So first and foremost, you need to have an executive summary. And the executive summary should be able to explain the entire deck on one slide. So if the board didn't read a single other slide outside of the executive summary, they should walk away knowing exactly what's going on, the main points you're trying to drive, and any supporting data related to those. And we'll show an example. Next, have performance to goal related data. This is probably one of the most important aspects of the board deck and most important aspects of the meeting. We have set a plan in place, and how are we performing to that plan? There are a lot of assumptions that are typically tied to that plan. Hiring, budgets, where you're going to allocate and invest capital next, and knowing where you are to that plan is extremely important. So make sure you have the scoreboard of any goals that you've set right at the front of the board deck, and there's no question whether we're hitting our plan or missing our plan. After we talk about performance data, this is the time to pick the main topics that you really want to drive home during this meeting. These topics should really center around decisions that you need to make. So a few examples might be, we're going to invest in a new product. We're going to invest in entering a new market. We're going to expand the business in this area. All of those type of decision-oriented topics are really, really important to put here, and then get the buy-in from the board and have people weigh in on this decision that you're making. Then make sure you're following the pyramid principle to start with that main topic, have a hypothesis in mind, such as we're creating this new product because we believe it will enable this much expansion across the customer base. Then have your supporting reasons why. Share a few reasons that relate to that main hypothesis, and then share any data related to those main points. In a board meeting, you can probably fit in 2 to 3 main topics that you want to cover. So make sure they're the most important and make sure they're structured really well so you can get through them quickly and get the buy-in that you need from the board. Next, this is something I would encourage everybody to do. Ask your board for help. You've presented a lot of data, you've presented a lot of decisions and things you would like to do in the future. They are there to help you, and they want to help you. So make sure you have a section to have very specific, pointed asks of how they can help, how they can get involved, and how you can work together to achieve the goals you're talking about in this meeting. Finish with a recap of everything that you presented, should be similar to the executive summary slide. And then at the end, have an appendix of all of the rollover data that you need to go over. Usually it's 10 to 20 slides of go-to-market data or some metrics that you like to measure to keep your finger on the pulse of a few things, but may not necessarily be related to the main points that you have earlier in the presentation. Have it there in case you need it in your back pocket, but it's not something that should be center stage. All right, here's a quick example of an executive summary slide that you can steal and start using in your board decks tomorrow. The way we like to structure board decks, especially in the executive summary slide, is really getting the good and bad news out early. So start with 2 sections. 1, highlight what's working well. So you can have a few positive points. In this case, we're expecting to hit our forecast next quarter. We're 110% above our ARR plan so far this year. And then we've also seen a significant reduction in churn. Start to highlight those things right at the beginning. So that way you can tell the board what's working well right out the gate. And then if any of these are related to any main topics or decision points you want to make, incorporate them here as well. Now, the other thing I would really encourage you to do is get bad news out. Highlight what is not working and what plan you have in place to fix what is not working. In this case, we have a couple points. We have new business bookings are at 90% of goal. We know that it's largely due to attrition. And we have done a few things to make sure that we don't have attrition in the future, so we don't expect this to be a problem. Next, channel partners are not contributing to the level of pipeline we expect. So maybe we expected them to be at 15% of the pipeline and they're really only bringing 5. So make sure the board knows that we know what our problems are so we can put a plan in place to fix them. Don't hide the bad news. It's going to come out anyway. Show that you know where it is, because every company is going to have something that's not working well, and show that you also have a plan to address it. This is the most important part of your executive summary, and it shows a level of executive maturity and trust that you're the right person in seat to understand what's working, what's not working, and what to do about it. I want to talk about a few data slide examples and show you the difference between a bad example and a good example. I'll admit, earlier in my career, I would have put this slide into a board deck and thought everything was totally fine. I have a really nice looking chart. It's color coded very well. It's descriptive. You know it's the year-to-date ARR waterfall, and the data is very accurate and very sound. The only issue is anybody reading this slide has no idea what the story is behind the data, and that's where you need to help them out. So let's take a look at the difference between this slide and one that tells a story. So here's an example of a slide that gives you context and tells a story behind the data. We talked earlier about making sure that your titles tell the story. So as your board is going through your deck, each slide title should really tell the story as they go through, and they may not even need to look at the chart. So in this example, Startup.ai has 110% to ARR goal, driven by greater than expected reduction in churn and an increase in expansion from new product A. So as you're looking at this waterfall, you now know that churn bucket is actually performing better than expected. You may not have known that context before. You know that expansion is performing better than expected because of the new product that you launched. And you have very clear callouts on the slide to inform you of what you should be looking at and what's important. Off to the right, we also have a few bullets that talk about results-oriented information and any highlights that are really important to talk about this data set in particular. So when we started off earlier and we said the deck should speak for itself, this is a very important component of that, highlighting the right data points that you would call out and narrate if you were in the meeting, and making sure all of that business context is on the slide itself. All right, we're going to cover a couple other slides that you're likely to incorporate in your board deck, and I want to highlight a few things that are really important to make sure you incorporate in the slide. So this slide right here, this is a new bookings to goal. I have it stacked by firmographic segment. For most companies that are in B2B, SaaS, this is going to be the most important segment to look at, but you can really stack it by what's important to you. So if product or region or something else makes more sense, go ahead and do that. One thing I want to point out that's really important is putting everything in context to a goal. So you can see we have a stacked bar graph. The red line there is the goal that we had for that given quarter. And without that goal, let's zoom in on Q3 for just a moment. Without the goal reference line, you would probably think Q3 was an excellent quarter. It looks like it's grown well over Q2. It's 55% over Q1. However, the expectation and level of investment that we made, we had a goal that was a little bit higher than that. So maybe we hired a lot of people, we significantly increased our spend in our channels, in our paid advertising, and we didn't really quite hit the goal we were expecting. So having the goal line there adds quite a bit of context to make sure that you can articulate if this is good or if this is bad. Another thing to highlight on this slide is making sure you have a forecast for the future. So Q4, this is a forecasted bar. It's important to communicate the results that we had in the past, but even more so, where are we going in the future? So making sure you have that forecast embedded in this slide and in reference to a goal is going to be really important as well. And keep a title that explains the performance, explains the story, and then have all of your supporting information in bullets off to the right. Another important slide that most of your presentations will have is going to be a pipeline coverage slide. So this is looking at your pipeline to quota. So how many opportunities or deals do you have open in reference to the quota and goal you have set ahead of you? And then I also layered in some coverage ratios. So as an example, in Q1, we have 5 times unweighted coverage and we have 1.5 times weighted coverage. Your weighted can be a forecast category, it could be a stage weighting, whatever weighting mechanism you have. But it's important to know how much pipeline do we have to the goals that we've set, and what does that look like moving out into the future to help inform how much pipeline we need to build. Same components as well have a title that calls out anything, part of the story that's important. Make any data callouts. In this example, why is unweighted coverage dropping so much in Q3? Is there anything going on that's worth noting? And then have any bullets off to the right. So having these charts that combine a lot of information into one slide can really give your board context and an understanding if things are going well or if things are not going well. I want to show a few marketing slide examples that really follow the same principles, but I want to highlight the importance of putting things to goals and adding context to the slide. So in this case, one of the most important metrics for a marketing department, especially in B2B SaaS, is SQLs to goal. So how many sales qualified leads or how many opportunities or how much created pipeline, whatever your vernacular is in your business, is marketing creating for sales. And there should be a very discrete goal set to that SQL production number and then graphing it by channel. Usually segmenting it by channel is going to be the most important. So I have this one stacked by channel here and in reference to a goal. Next is going to be taking a look at your customer acquisition cost. So you can see which channels are performing the best and most affordably and most efficiently, and should give an idea of channels we can double down on and ones that we may want to take a look at before investing more. Same concepts though, title that tells a story, bullets of information to the right, any meaningful data callouts, and then having all the information somebody needs to understand if something's working well or not. Here's a slide example for customer success performance data. Usually the most important performance metric is going to be managing churn. So making sure you have a goal that articulates where you expect churn to be that's related to your ARR build goal as a company as a whole. It's going to be really important. And here's one way to graph it and then give you the context. So same principles, making sure you have a goal of churn. In this case, it's a retention goal. We obviously don't want more churn. We want to keep it under control. So as long as we're not going below that churn line, we should be good for the overall ARR plan. In this case, we stacked it by reason, but you could also stack it by your firmographic segment. You could stack it by health. You could stack it by region. Whatever makes sense for your customer segmentation. I'm just showing the one that is most typical for B2B SaaS companies. Now that you've gone through your data, you've covered your main decision points that you want to talk through with your board, this is your opportunity to ask your board for help. I wanted to give you a framework of a few things that you should ask, or a few things that I would say are okay to ask your board for help, and highlight a couple things that you should not ask, because not every question you should be asking of your board. So I want to start off with keeping in mind your board is invested in your company and invested in your success. They have a real motive to make sure the company is doing as well as possible, and we're making decisions that make sense for the business. So understanding that that's where they're coming from should enable you to feel comfortable asking very specific ways they can help. I threw a couple of examples here, and these might not be the exact ones for you, but I want this to just spark some imagination of ways you could use your board, and think about questions that you can ask them. So a couple examples of what you should ask or can ask. One, take a look at any introductions to their other portcos that are facing similar challenges or opportunities that you are. Are you expanding into Europe? Do they have a company in their portfolio that has done the same motion that is similar to your company? Can you meet with their head of sales? Can you meet with their head of marketing? What did they learn when they did the same thing you're trying to do? And how can they help you avoid any mistakes? Another one, if you're looking for leadership roles, and I'm going to very specifically highlight this, leadership roles. Can they make any introductions? Are you looking for a new CRO, CMO, executive level position, or maybe a VP level within the organization? Do they have anyone that they know in their portfolio that might be looking or just transitioned out of an exit that's looking to go into another startup? It's really important to ask them if they know anyone, because they have probably seen somebody be successful in the role and could be very beneficial to you. Now, I wouldn't go to your board asking them for introductions to potential SDRs, AEs, or CSM. Those are people that you should be able to recruit on your own. But if you need help filling leadership roles, they're there to help and should be able to make a lot of introductions. Another one is any macro level considerations. How does the market look? Are there certain regions that are doing well or not? Is it a good time to take on more funding or to hold off? Getting their guidance, because they're spending a lot of time across multiple companies and multiple businesses, can help give you an outside perspective on some decisions you want to make. As we went through the board deck, you probably had a few main decision topics that you wanted to go through, where you had very clear decision-making criteria and what was at stake if you made the decision this way or another way. Having them weigh in and give some guidance is going to be really important. Do not ask them what you should be doing. Do not ask them what those main points should be, but ask for their weigh in on ideas that you already presented to them. And then a couple other ones at the end. Any introductions to potential leads, especially if you're doing enterprise sales. Do they know a CFO within a company that's in your target? Do they know a way to get into a potential company? Are you working a deal where somebody has a relationship with an executive there? Any help to help close that deal can really add an impact for them and for you, and is worth asking. And then last, if you feel it's necessary, can they benchmark how you're doing against other portfolio companies? Is your conversion rate on par, your sales cycle on par? Just any measurement to know if you're on track or off track. Now, there's probably an even bigger list of things not to ask, but I just wanted to throw a few to give you an understanding of the type of questions not to ask. So first, how they think the quarter went. You should be coming in with an opinion. You should be telling them how the quarter went and why it went that way and what you're going to do about it. They're not there to help that conversation. They're there to help you weigh in on decision making and what you're going to do next. Do not ask for help on reporting or data analysis or what you should be measuring or why you should be measuring something. You should know the metrics that you need to measure to run your business. Own the data, own the metrics that matter, stop measuring the metrics that don't, and explain to your board why it's important you measure these ones and why everything else might be noise. You have to own your results, you have to own your data, and you don't need your board's help to weigh in on that particular topic. Now, they can give you a few ideas, like when we were talking about benchmarking, but they shouldn't necessarily be driving the decision of the metrics you need to run your business. Along with the sequence of slides, I also wanted to give you a template by department. So you know which slides are probably must-haves to have in the board deck somewhere, and then which ones can probably be appendix slides or something you keep in your back pocket if needed. So feel free to screenshot this. We talked about most of these as we went through, but take this template, feel free to use it in your own board deck, and then make sure you're enhancing any of the departmental slides with appendix slides, just in case you need to double click on a particular metric to see what's working or what's not. We're going to end this with the most important aspect of managing a board meeting and building the perfect board deck, and that is preparation. Let's walk through a couple ways that are really important to prepare. So first, make sure you assign the board deck keeper. It can get really daunting with multiple owners and multiple people in there. So assign somebody who's responsible for putting the deck together. They know it's coming up every quarter. They can get on a regular cadence of updating the data, gathering requirements from the team, and make sure that it's put together on time. Usually, if you have a VP of RevOps or somebody senior in that role, that's a good person to give the responsibility to, at least for the go-to-market portion. If not, you may end up relying on your VP of sales, VP of marketing, or somebody else in leadership to do it. Next, don't wait for the quarterly board meeting to start working on your board deck. This should be a monthly rollover process that you do internally. Have an internal monthly business review that pretty much goes over the same data you'd be going over in a board deck. So that way you're not spending it data gathering or trying to figure out exactly what you want to present. You're really spending the time crafting the story and exactly what you need your board's help with. Third, when you walk into the boardroom or log into the board Zoom, make sure you have a data one-pager of everything that you think you might need to know in the meeting. You don't want to be fumbling around going through dashboards, going through old decks, looking for data that might support or enhance one of the arguments you're making. You really need to have all that information in one easy place to see and make sure you have it readily available. So have one sheet, put every metric that you can think of that's important for you, important for your business, and have anything that might come up. An example of this, when you were in college and you were ready to take a test and you got to bring your one sheet of notes, this is the same example. The board meeting is a big test of your executive maturity, your way to articulate what happened and why, and what you plan to do for the future, and you have the opportunity to show up with a cheat sheet, so I recommend you do. Focus on the story and decisions that need to be made. So there's a lot of data to sift through. You can really get lost in building hundreds and hundreds of slides, but focus on what's important and focus on what supports the decision you need to make as a business. Do a quick dry run with your team, especially a couple people who may not have seen the story before. Make sure that the story is easily articulated, it follows pyramid principles, and make sure that they can understand what main points you're driving and that you have enough data to support your claims. This shouldn't be super long. You should be working through this during a monthly business review process, but take 30 minutes to an hour to dry run as a team, come up with anything else that you want to add into it, and make sure that you have all of the information you need. And last, send out the deck well ahead of time. You want to make sure when you get to the meeting, you're not running through data, you're not running through slides. You are there to make decisions and have a discussion about the main points. The deck should speak for itself. So send the deck out well ahead of time. I recommend giving a week or more if you can, and give your board time to read through it so they can come prepared for you as well. I really hope you found this helpful, and this framework and format will give you and your team more effective board meetings. And I know at the beginning I mentioned that my CRO said at every board meeting, somebody ends up getting fired. They just don't know it yet. But I hope with this framework in mind, somebody gets promoted or your business grows, and it's because of the effective board meeting that you were able to put together.